Pharmaceuticals kind of like the Air Force. It's very sophisticated. It's long lead. You have to build a giant airplane, and then everyone gets in it. Then you fly over your target and bomb. You never get to see your customers. Number one risk to any business is regulation. It's that third hand. We can have and know our competitors. We can know what good technology is, and we can keep advancing that. But then there could be some overt third hand of regulation that comes in that changes the rules.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Quiet Work podcast. Today, we are going to talk about merger and acquisitions, building, fixing, and then selling companies, and how AI and supply chain efficiency can help you stand out from your competitors. We're going to focus also on the medical tech field. I'm bringing in an expert in that matter. Michael, please introduce yourself and tell us about a company or companies you represent, and we'll kick it off with that.
Well, thanks. I don't know about companies representing. I think it's probably marketplaces, et cetera, and where things go. I've been in medtech and pharmaceuticals for about 30 years. So everything from, HIV protease inhibitor drugs, the first one that was brought to market, all the way to we've actually made some stents as of recently for cardiology. So all the way across the board. So drug-eluting stents. So you name it, if you can make it, we probably have been somewhere around the hoop doing something of that nature.
Take us back through the history. What was the decision driver for you 30 years ago to join that field, that space?
I think most people get into these things by drift, right? Something catches your eye and next thing you know, you sort of happenstance into things. So I started in pharmaceuticals and it was fun. There's a big impact with that. And then obviously you migrate down and then devices are pharmaceuticals kind of like the Air Force, right? It's very sophisticated. It's long lead. You have to build a giant airplane and then everyone gets in it. Then you fly over your target and bomb. You never get to see your customers. You just open the bays and, it's like mail order drugs and things of that nature, commercials and on TV, people talk to your doctor about this special drug. And it's a little bit impersonal. It does impact a huge part of industry and people's lives. But the reality is that devices are way different. Devices are a bit like the Marines. It's like hand-to-hand combat. So you have to know everyone in the foxhole with you. You have to know where your enemy is because the danger is higher. It's just a different animal. And I'm using this as like an analogy. So you either like flying in airplanes and on that big scale where it's a little bit less personal, right? And longer leads. So, the reciprocity on information is slower, right? You invest in something that maybe takes 19 years to get to market. Devices can be as short as a year and you're in market. So it's a bit more tactile and it's a different kind of career path.
So you had pharmaceuticals and you had devices as well. If you look back at those 3 decades, what were the major shifts in the industry that you've observed over those 3 decades?
Major inflection points would be the intervention. The number one risk to any business is regulation. Competitors, we can know what good technology is and we can keep advancing that, but then there could be some overt third hand of regulation that comes in that changes the rules, so to speak, or changes the way pricing or modules work. So how do you gain access to the facility? Can you only sell in a hospital? Can you only sell in a region? So I'd say the biggest things to affect healthcare have been first, over regulatory capture, and then second, how decisions are made, which is, who makes the buying decision in inelastic marketplaces. And this is devices versus pharma. Pharma is the same thing. Pharma went, direct to consumer. Right. And COVID really accelerated that. And you've seen companies like Hims and all these other things where you can, literally get online, have a script written for you by some third party doc just from a questionnaire that you fill out. Maybe you do something like a Zoom call to identify, your pathology or confirm it. Right. You just make an attestation and then they'll mail you a script, which is kind of incredible. Devices you can't do. You're not installing, a stent in yourself. Let's hope. But when the buying decision gets removed from the surgeon or even from, in some respects, from the hospital or facility, it changes that whole landscape.
I can
And
imagine.
people, yeah, I mean, I think, back up, it's like people think it's like the Wild West, and when you talk to the FDA, they're sort of inculcated with the training that, if left without massive regulation and a capture net on top of industry, industry would kill people for $1. And it's just not true, right? So, the by and large, the majority of any industry is going to try to do the right thing to benefit its customer the most, so that way your product is used the most, right? It's just like everything, AI, DVD players, for the love of God, anything across the board, it's the same idea. And for some reason, this industry is like, well, we may want to back off a little bit because, we don't know if this device works. And all that does is stall investment in this space and advancement of innovation.
Yeah, man, I agree. And then you have now the longevity space as well that is
Oh,
becoming
yeah.
very popular. People experimenting on their own with peptides, with injectable stuff
Yeah.
and things.
Yeah.
That market doesn't seem to be yet pretty regulated or regulated at all, I should say. And yeah, that's adding definite. That's a major shift right now that I've been observing over in that space over the last couple of years, because everyone wants to live longer and stay healthier or stay healthy in
Hmm.
general, and that's becoming a big thing. Like you've mentioned, you can go online, do fill out a simple form, and all of a sudden you have some medicine and some injectable vials at your
Yeah.
doorstep.
And that's a whole crazy thing. I mean, I totally agree. Like Tiger 21 just had this whole thing about that because, peptides, you have, AI now coming in, they're sequencing the genome. You have CRISPR. So they take your blood and go back and look at your blood and see what your genome is. And then they'll try to design a peptide chain that works for you. So it's completely custom, and which is really kind of cool. Now, whether or not it has real long-term data is a whole nother issue, but anecdotally, there's a ton of people doing that. If you remember when PPACA was signed in, a ton of money was invested by all sorts of groups to put these off, right outside the United States. So Tijuana, Mexico, right over the border. El Paso, Cyprus has a bunch of these institutions, all over the place where you take US patients that have the capital to afford it to go get concierge medicine. Brilliant. And then PPAC sort of morphed and those things went away. But now you probably have seen that there's tons of people doing like stem cell stuff and peptide related stuff, or even the psychedelics, right? Psychedelic treatment for PTSD and things of that nature, which is interesting. Even GLP-1s are being used for anti-addictive behavior somehow because it affects the satiation mechanism,
Yes.
which is still unknown, right? So you become satiated when you eat. That's why it holds the food in your belly longer, the GLPs, and it's actually caused smoking cessation and drug use cessation. So people are experimenting with that stuff as well. So it is kind of interesting. Everyone's become their own little mini MD.
There you go.
I
Exactly.
shouldn't say
And
everyone, people that have the time and excess capital to do so.
absolutely, yes. And
Yeah.
AI kind of helps with that, even though I've seen ChatGPT recently changing their policies and their responses that you would get if you say something medical related to your blood work or anything related to health. They're more, how do you say it, taking few steps to make sure that they don't say, or AI will not say something that might cause harm, or say
Yeah.
something that will move you towards that untested path, and you might hurt yourself. You've mentioned in our
Well, you have to know what those things are. You can't just do stuff.
well, we hope that more people will approach it that way, but I know
Yeah.
from a lot of people that that's not the case.
So I have a bunch of friends, obviously, that are doctors, and some guys are like ER guys, and they're absolutely just cool human beings. They're just amazing people because they just grind, right? And they see all sorts of crazy stuff. So, which is way different than a surgeon, right? A surgeon has this thing, and you bring a surgeon in for cardiac, or you bring it in for brain, or whatever the thing is, ortho. But like a ER guy sees all this stuff, right? You don't know what's coming in the door, and they just kind of like, so they're punchy guys and they're super dynamic. And I always ask these guys, like, what's the craziest thing you've seen? And this one story from about 15 years ago still sticks with me. He was like, we had a frequent flyer, and this gal would come in, and she was like I guess she was homeless, but she was obviously a drug user. And she was unconscious, non-responsive. They do the vital sign check, and he's like, we roll her in, we take a quick picture, just of the head, and then body to see if there was anything in there. And he's like, her neck blossomed, just her neck lit up, right? And he's like, what is that? He's looking at the film. They take another film. And what was happening is she was actually mainlining heroin into her carotid arteries on both sides. And so she would mainline the heroin and then just pass out and then break the needles off. So her neck was like littered with these needles. And we both were like dissecting that, because we talk about people taking healthcare into their hands. And it's amazing how resilient the human body is. Because this woman ultimately perished, but she lived long enough that, she had a bunch of needles in her neck and, never threw a clot. I shouldn't say never, but for some time did not. And you think that's it's amazing, how plastic and accommodating the body is, right? So could it take the wrong peptide for a while? Sure. I don't, there may be a downstream effect to that, but it's certainly, people are definitely experimenting with it. Bottom line.
Absolutely. And our
Yeah.
bodies are, as you've mentioned, very forgiving. So let's take care of our bodies. That's the message here.
Yeah. It's a big deal. I mean, I hear about this probably once a week from guys that are really my age, just above 50, and they're recognizing, look, I really like skiing. I want to keep skiing for the next 20 years. I like doing XYZ, and I want to keep doing it for the next 20 years. So they're recognizing, that diet, sleep, nutrition are super important. Then they're adding that fourth element of, what other medicaments are they that we can add to the bouillabaisse to make this, to optimize.
100%. I've seen,
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of good stories to hear as well, or had a friend who torn his Achilles tendon and went through the surgery, and he was able to walk within less than 2 months. I think it was like
Yeah.
6 weeks where he started walking. Obviously, the area was still swollen, but the pain was still there. Obviously, he went through a major surgery, so he was expected to not be really walking a lot for the first 3 months, and then slowly
Yeah.
reintroducing it on that side. And he is a big guy too, 240 plus
Wow.
pounds. So not easy on those tendons, especially if they're torn.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was one story that I know. I had a friend who is about your age as well, who doctors recommended a surgery, and that's the only way to heal his shoulder, something in his shoulder. And
Yeah.
then thanks to some solid, more tested peptides, let's say, that we all know and hear about, he was able to avoid a surgery, and he's well on his way to recover and do them what how do you call them, the Ironman in
Oh, wow.
Santa
Yeah.
Barbara this year. So this or next year. So that's
That's a different
possible.
level. That's a different level. Yeah, I get it. I get it. It's just a different level of just destroying yourself, you know? I kind of, because I used to race motorcycles, and I had a fracture. I had a trimalleolar, so I broke my foot off in a crash, and they gave me peptides for that.
There you go.
Yeah, and it was pretty phenomenal. I had great healing from it. And it was great. I was back out within, it was a short amount of time. It was pretty good.
Absolutely. And as
Yeah.
you said, if you have someone who wants to ski or snowboard for another 10 years, 15, 20
Yeah.
years, you know how great it is for your knees. Especially now when you
Yeah.
watch the Olympics, it's pretty scary how it looks like on your knees. And we've seen some major accidents at the Olympics as well. So yeah, absolutely. If you can expand the quality or maintain the quality of your life for a little bit longer, why not? And if it's working, I hope it's going to work for you as well. But I wanted to bring us back to the business mode here. You've mentioned in our conversation something that made me research it a lot in our previous conversation, a market involution. A lot of companies, zombie companies, I think you call them,
Yeah.
that
Zombies.
are
Yeah.
essentially not aware that they're going belly up yet. So let's talk about that. What did you mind by market involution in your space?
Well, I mean, there's that's a specific marketplace in that instance. But I mean, if you look at, say, take for example, a blue chip industry used to be office space, right? Anyone that had a 401k or whatever the case may be, they would have, firms would own office space, right? That would be somewhere in the portfolio, because it always just was like this boring, constant return of 3 or 8% inside a portfolio. And COVID just threw that right out the window, right? So you had a bunch of stuff happen at the same time. People couldn't go back to the office. Then we had this mantra of, work from home, stay safe. And then we scared everyone. They didn't want to go back to the office. People, sort of became reliant upon not commuting and saving that time. So these are these weird things happening as well. How does that come back? The guys that I know in that space are they're super dubious about how quickly that comes back per geography. So that's going to be a real thorn for a while. That one's going to be a tough one. Other marketplaces too. I mean, we see it, obviously my experience is orthopedics and the companies inside that space, device related. There's a culmination of multiple variables that are putting pressure on the financial chain. And the issue is that you can't maintain that. Something will have to yield. So, and when we talked about initially was market involutions, and China has a neat example of that with its electric car market. There were a lot of electric car companies because, right, there were government incentive to agree to do so. And obviously there was a big global push to try to reduce carbon emissions, so that there's all this incentive that the future would be electric cars. So you had so many people making them, they had government incentives, and the market wasn't big enough to support all those. So it's a perfect involution, right? Too many competitors, becomes a cost constraint issue. And then they start sabotaging pricing, and it just collapses out. And so you're left with just a few people, and people struggle along with it, but that's the way it is. So, and I think there's a few marketplaces. The U.S. has a few of those. It's interesting. There's also a debt capacity too, like how much you can take on. So again, going back, not to make it sound like it's too complex, but if your cost structure is built upon, selling at $10 and now you're selling at $5, you can't maintain the same cost structure unless you do what? More than double your sales. But it's not doubling, it's more than doubling because the cost structure, right? It's a bit of a differential equation. So it's just basic math like that. And I don't think people have caught up with it.
I
So you just
agree.
sort
And
of vacuum out. Just what happens is it just sort of drops out at some point.
I've observed it in all kinds of industries. Recently had a guest in a chocolate space, and I didn't know that
Yeah.
cocoa prices went up from 3,000 per ton to 13 plus thousand a ton within very short period of time. I mean, if your cost of if your cost of product is essentially 4xing within few months, and then you throw in the tariffs onto it, that adds another 40%.
Yeah.
It's going to be challenging to survive in any market, right? And then you've mentioned the car market, electric vehicles. That's
Yeah.
another great example where, from my perspective, it was always interesting. I was in the renewable energy space when I first moved to the United States, and I saw people obviously purchasing solar for their homes, and then they start adding one, two, sometimes three when the family grows larger, electric vehicles, and they're expecting their electric bill to stay the same. But if you're paying 40 cents on average per kilowatt hour, and if you're charging a 80 kilowatt battery once or twice a week, maybe even more than that, then all of a
Yeah.
sudden you're pretty much doubled or tripled your electric bill. And if that's 500 to $1,000 a month for the summertime here where we live, and you might be paying thousands of dollars for electric bill just to charge your electric vehicle and to move around.
I look, and it's weird because this is going to be public, but it's sort of, we've sort of lost what, like the definition of gravity.
Mm.
And it's a weird thing. It's like, I was just I have this crazy, she's a really neat lady. She's super, I train at a gym, and she's like in her 60s, but she's just an absolute beast. She's amazing. And it's amazing, because she's a fundamental person, just operated in the world based upon, transactional relationships that aren't like big business and PE funds, right? So it's real. It's rental properties and, working with your hands and stuff like this, which is really cool. But it's so ethereal. Like people that have had to produce, live and die by that sword, they understand that there's no such thing as your truth or my truth. There's just the truth. And once we migrate from that, it's lost because they were just talking about, stories or fiction. The reality is, like, look at all the data centers that are coming in our electric bill in Chicagoland area. We're subsidizing data centers, and you're right. Anyone that's sitting there plugging all this stuff in has got to realize that you're paying so much more money because now you're subsidizing data centers to consume a greater portion of a finite thing, which is electricity. It's odd to me, like the average guy, especially unfortunately for you guys, like California, people think electricity comes from the wall. They really do. They don't even know. It's like you just plug it in. It's like, well, okay, where does that go? Well, I mean, it's don't know. It just comes here.
Absolutely. And it reminds me on a project that we did, like donation of a small solar ground mount system for a local zoo that is pretty very popular here
Yeah,
in California, in Southern California.
yeah,
And the purpose of this was to teach kids how electricity is created from solar photovoltaics, how the process works. And I
yeah.
hope that the next generation will know that the energy is not coming from the wall, and that we have to be a lot more conscious to figure out where the demand can be, how we can
Yeah.
cover that demand that we have for electricity if we all of a sudden 10x our consumption.
It's so crazy because it's like there's this weird renaissance thing because we are working with a bunch of different trying to hone this down, but there's some really neat and amazing PE funds in Chicagoland area. They're also part of the YPO group. So I'll put a plug in for that as well. And so they're super smart guys and they're just getting involved in things that make sense. They're just must haves like right? HVAC repair, roofing. And what's amazing is that it's this inversion of the Renaissance where people don't know how to do anything. They don't even own a tool set, which is, look, each to their own. The challenge is that at some point in time, that may be a problem, right? You may have to actually know how to do something. And it's interesting. I was at another YPO group, last week, and one of the topics that someone had brought up to the floor to discuss was, the average machinist in the United States is like 60 years old. And it's like, no one wants to do that. It's super hard work. It actually requires intelligence. To learn how to operate that stuff takes time. So what do you do if your population base actually doesn't know how to make stuff at that level? Right. So who do you hand that off to? So, and that's where maybe AI comes in. And can you actually take controllers on machines so that way you can have a software engineered part on your screen, maybe analyze it through a 3D printer to see if it's reality, but convert it back over to a hard part from a machine. Right. Cause that's a weird thing when you look at it. Cause when you look at the Asian marketplaces and even India that uses some machining, but not as sophisticated as like Taiwan, Japan, China, and dare I say Vietnam. They have like thousands and tens of thousands of people that are machinists to make parts. I know this sounds silly, but the reality is that you can't bring all that back. There's just no capacity for it.
Mhm.
So you're going to have this offset to where there's just a bunch of stuff that is still made overseas, and we just have to understand what that is. Is it critical, non-critical?
It's a good point.
Yeah,
And the
and
HVAC,
it's go ahead.
and I wanted to say that the HVAC story reminded me of your $2,200 quote
Yeah,
that you got for a
yeah,
simple fix, where the part was what sub $100, the part that you use.
$180. Yeah, yeah,
There you go.
yeah.
There you go. So the markup was there, and definitely people without tools. That's very common nowadays, especially in larger cities where people never have to see a screwdriver and never touch one. A lot of
Yeah,
people.
the one of the guys after we chatted, I was talking with someone about that story, and the guy was like, "Yeah, when I moved into this new neighborhood, and there were homes, I guess maybe the homes were like 800,000, and in Chicago that's pretty good, you know." And he's like, "We had this like cul-de-sac party." And he's like, I'm looking in people's garages and they had nothing in the garage. It was just drywalled and maybe there was a golf bag. And he's like, people didn't even have like a rake. And I was like, wow. So it's like the whole, it's weird. It's like you've outsourced everything. Do you know what I mean? It's just,
Yeah.
I guess it's fine. It just, I don't have a problem with it. It's just, it's like a demographic consumption change.
That's an interesting observation from that
Yeah.
person. And someone told me recently that we're making more money than ever in history. We're richer than ever in history, yet
Yes.
have more debt than ever in history. And
Yes.
yeah, also let's back to the medical field. We're I mean, not because, but we are automating everything, outsourcing everything. We don't have to do anything. They get our hands dirty, and yet the depression, the mental health is suffering for a lot of people, and it's a big topic. So it's interesting. And the
Yeah.
relationships, social relationships are hurting. So that's an interesting pivot to observe, and that obviously taps into that. Moving on, I wanted to talk.
That's a whole other topic. That has nothing to do with, well, it will ultimately have stuff to do with business for sure, right? Like Gen Z and then Gen Alpha, there's a lot of data coming out about that, which is really kind of spooky. I mean, if you think about like which blows my mind, this inversion of praxis as well, where we've done like Title IX stuff to get to advance more females into a lot of different spaces, and now it's like an overshoot. So the majority of college graduates are female, the majority of lawyers in law school are female, the majority of medical students in medical school are female. And good, right, bad, ugly, different. That's just the data. So it's just interesting to see how that, what that rebound condition looks like from like employer standpoints and how that works. And it's like, it's this balancing of an equation that, maybe we could take a lesson from the Great Depression when they took over the national parks out west, and they fenced them in and found out more animals died once fencing them in. So they unfenced them to allow, natural selection to occur. And it's just funny how we sort of always try to invade that, and to our own detriment to a degree. Well, we say that because it's interesting. It's like, that's a hypocritical statement. I'll even say it because all of medical device and all of pharmaceuticals is to intervene on a process that should be in quote natural,
Mm,
or, and despite like trauma, not natural, but it still is. So it's interesting. Like even China is increasing their retirement age because people are living too long. And so the system, the economy won't be able to afford that.
hmm, that's a good.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point.
It's a strange thing because it's like Peter Zeihan, this guy, he's writes books. He's been writing books on this for years. He was in these think tanks talking about population basis, and the replication rate's 2.1 for society. Most of societies, especially first world, well below 2.1. And then we may have talked about that, but like South Korea is gone by 2100. It won't exist. Japan and China. China has a huge population issue because of the one child policy that was indoctrinated for so long. You can't just pull back on it day one and then all of a sudden everyone reverts and it just converts and people start having multiple babies. There's still a ton of people that are married. They affectionately call it the dinks, dual income, no kids, where both people in the relationship are working kids. And so, that social system doesn't work when it inverts. And, we're not going to solve the world's problems here, but it's fascinating because by 2050, the data looks like they're going to have the majority of their population will be over 65 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's like, what do you do? Because when you think about it, that's where you come back to like, will you have a military? Will you have will you have a workforce? Will you have entrepreneurs? Will you have, right? Because then once you get that conversion, if you look at any of this stuff, you have to pull off all this data because it's a macro topic, right? When you look at the micro inside of that, just looking at the cost of healthcare when your population base is above 65, you have a J hook on it, just goes through the roof.
Big
So
time.
yeah, and that's a weird thing to think about. So that's why you get back to peptides and why that's, if you can keep people healthier longer for lower cost, that has a massive economic advantage.
I agree, and
Yeah.
that leaves more of us with more energy, more brain power, and physical capability to do something. I agree
You're
that that
also a
that's
taxpayer for longer.
there you go, and pay more because you can do more.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. That's the whole point is like the Canada put that MAID system in the medical assistance in death. And, one of the things they offer in Canada now, if you come in and you're outside the equality points, is that you can check the box that you'd like to do suicide or whatever they call that now on the internet. And it's incredible because it's instead of actually intervening, it's like, yeah, we don't want to, it's a 72 Buick and we're not going to afford to put a transmission in it. So let's just junk it.
Yeah, it's scary, but
I'm
that's
actually curious to know how that works. But I'm just a thought. I'm super curious to see how that works with regard to your life insurance. So if you choose to do the MAID, adopt medical assisted suicide or death on your own volition, does your family or estate still get paid out on your life insurance? I wonder. Need someone to
We have to
Google
ask
that.
some Canadians who are more maybe directly approaching that.
It's legal in half the United States.
Is it?
Yep,
It has
half
a
the states.
nice ringing name to it. Made right was the
Oh, you always
term.
have to have it. You got to sell, man. You got to have a yeah. You have to have a shtick. Absolutely.
Always those marketers coming up with interesting names for stuff like that. I
Yeah,
didn't know that it's partially legal in the United States.
yeah. I think
That's
29 states. Don't quote me, but it's something of that nature.
wow.
Yeah,
Well,
isn't
with
that
that,
crazy?
if that yeah, that is absolutely crazy. But that is
Yeah,
a interesting segue into artificial intelligence because
yeah.
someone has to stay alive and someone has to do something. And it looks like AI is going to do any made activities, then it's not going to kill itself. So,
No,
where do
you're
you
right.
see AI in your space? Maybe when we will look at operational efficiency or supply chain efficiency, that those are the things we discussed as well in the past, and how AI can help you have a leaner team and still great output or same quality output.
I think it's a tool, right? And it still can't replace critical thinking or high decision making that are parametric, right? From different, unless you train the model to do as much. But it can never be trained as much as someone, as a human being that has proprioception to numerous events, right? Because it's an ask and answer thing, right? It's not taking into account your entire life from birth to today and all the people you know and all the things you can impact and all that network and infrastructure. It's taking a query of a given thing. So I would equate it to this. It's an amazingly awesome tool that I use every day. I actually use 3 different platforms every single day. And we're trying to use more of it to optimize because you can effectively have it do really any order of function that is operational, somewhat non-forward facing, at least in this space. Now, I say that with tongue. I'm catching myself a little bit because you can use it to make cold calls and be I'm sure you've heard robocalls and it sounds amazing. It'd be like,
100%.
"Hey, Matt, how are you?" And it talks to you and it's incredible, right? And it'll actually solve problems and answer questions and go and run query, which is amazing. But
I've
like
seen
for
great
example,
examples of that. Yeah.
yeah, so what do I think it is? I think it's no different than like when they came out with a nail gun for roofers. You didn't need to have 10 guys anymore. You could have one.
Mm.
It's just an amazing tool. And we've had it write provisional patents. We've had it write regulatory documents. We've had it review massive data sets. We took a pro forma financial model that is a massive model. It's so big. It's probably, I don't know how big it is. I won't even say, but you can't email it. That's how big it is. Dumped it into 2 separate models and had them talk to each other to remake a new pro forma for a 3 product company. And it did it
Mm.
with only a little tweaking. And that blew my mind because that model would usually take like a CFO type of thinker, an FP&A person, financial planning analysis person to go through and look at the KPIs of the business. And this thing did it, it probably took less than 5 minutes.
The speed
So
always amazing.
yeah, I'm wickedly excited by it. I just think it's amazing stuff. Now, self-driving cars, I'm not as bullish on. I think that to me, I would love self-driving cars if I was a plaintiff's attorney.
There we go. Have you been
Love
to
those.
San Francisco recently?
No, well, yeah, but not. I haven't seen there. I was in Arizona where I saw Waymo for the first time.
I've never seen something like that as in San Francisco. Literally every
Okay,
second car driverless. It
yeah,
was insane, and they were testing a lot more cars, so you could see that the driver was on the passenger seat in some of
yeah,
the cars that they're testing. But yes, it was quite like out of the movie, out of the future. I've
yeah,
never seen anywhere else like to that level where everywhere you look and see those sort of
yeah.
the cars without a driver and the passengers are in the back. So still a
I
bit
know.
scared of me to be honest, but I mean, I guess that's what people are accepting already. So if they accept it,
Well,
they're gonna have that option.
and the weird, look, and I probably sound like an anti-technology person, and I hate that because in one of the groups I'm in, I've been this guy that's always like, well, that really has to be adjudicated properly, and and I'm obviously, and I'm just going to say, I mean, I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm used to taking inordinate risks, right? But they're managed risks. And like that it's a weird one to me. Because it seems like and I don't want to, I kind of, I wrestle with this thing. It's like a Ouroboros to me. It sort of loops around because, and I don't want to sound like I'm whining, but it seems odd because like in Chicago, like I had friends, like old school friends, like immigrant guys that, right off the boat can barely speak English. They would go and save up their money, a group of three guys, and they bought a Chicago medallion. You know what that is? Like a medallion it's a taxi medallion. It's a big they do it in New York too. It's a big metal stamp and they screw it to the hood of the car and then you can be a cab, right?
I
And
see.
so these things were in Chicago before Uber came in, they were about $1 million, 800 to, yeah. So,
Wow.
so people would like go into hock. They would mortgage their house. So that's why in this instance, three dudes put a bunch of money in to get this medallion. And then they just drove the car nonstop. Right. So the car was always moving. It makes sense. And these guys were just banging away at it. And then you couldn't come into Chicago because of regulation unless you had a medallion. And then Rahm Emanuel comes in and lets Uber just drive in
Wow. I didn't know
and they
that.
give free rides. And so that's what there's something about it that just smells bad to me. Like I get it. I totally get it. It makes sense if it saves people time and it's safe. I'm all for it. It just seems like it seems like there's something odd afoot. I don't
That's
know.
an interesting story. I think the only thing that comes to mind is that Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger's advice to always follow the incentive. Well,
Yes.
who was at the other side of the incentives here?
Yeah.
If it's something like that, because yeah, that
And
sounds interesting.
Uber's been genius coming into marketplaces because they come in, they give 90 days of free rides, and what that does is it collapses the local market. So if
Mm,
you're a taxi driver or if you're a local guy, it'll crush you.
yeah,
You'll have to join them, and then they can ratchet back up after you get this quasi monopolization. I'm not picking on it. I'm just simply elucidating that's the model, and it really is incredible. You probably under, realize it or know that Austin banned that because that's what it did is they came in and crushed the local drivers and then you're sort of forced to join. And the reason I use that as an example is I'm not sure what the point is. I get what Waymo is and I understand the whole point of it. But if the idea is that you're going to price out or legislate in that certain areas are relegated to driverless vehicles so that way that self autonomy, the autonomy allows it so that way you don't have the chaos theory of, someone drunk driving or something that just
yes,
crashes into three Waymos. But then it turns into, okay, who's going to be licensed to have a Waymo, and and you can use the legalization of marijuana in California as a good example of that. So more marijuana in California is still sold outside of the legal route than through the legal process because the taxation and regulatory capture of it's so large.
huh? Interesting. Some of the
Yeah.
stakeholders and board members have read Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. I'm pretty sure. Sounds
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a part of the dark tetrad, right? Machiavellianism. So
Yeah, Machiavellianism, and then I'll throw in Edward Bernays with his propaganda book that was developed before we seen propaganda, as we all know. He was the father of it, and that wasn't necessarily used for bad cases when he was writing it or creating it, based on
yeah,
observation. How we
you're going to you're going to slide into a place that's just crazy, right? That's a whole nother crazy program. The propaganda ministries. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you mentioned three large language models or three AI platforms. What do you use them for on a day to day in your line of work?
Just to optimize, workflow like emails, document review. If there's anything that requires a bit more legwork, you'll go into like Claude. And my son actually wrote an app that you have a folder where you give it a workflow, and it's a folder we called machine learning. You just dump all the stuff you want it to look at, and it'll run a command prompt at night, suck from the folder, and then add a file to it. And you can do it all. I mean, you can ask it to build this for you. It's just, I mean, you literally have an IT guy, an IT department in these applications. I mean, they're just so incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. And if,
Yeah.
I've recently learned how to code with AI and build
Yeah.
websites based on
Yeah.
pure code. And obviously, I had a basic understanding of code from from my previous career and from high school
Yeah.
in Germany, actually, where I started learning about that a few years ago. But I mean, it was just mind blowing how fast it is. And if you have a basic understanding of things, which again, you can use the free tools out there to learn the
Yeah.
foundations, fundamentals of it, then you can definitely scale it up with AI. It's just so fast and saves you so much time. So
The question
absolutely.
is how do you make money with it, right? So that's the issue is like, at JP Morgan this year was like, well, you have to, there's been a ton of money invested into AI. And so now it's like, great, just saving time is not really a value, right? It's a value to you and I, but it's not a value to actually monetize it properly. So, everyone's standing on top of the APIs and now you're getting into this, agentic platforms of what can you do with it, right? So where can you actually truly benefit and drive value?
That's a good one. And what I've been questioning myself that a lot, especially when I'm speaking with someone who owns a company for 20, 30, 40 years or is part of
Yeah.
that company for that many years. And all of a sudden, the only thing I see on the description of the company is AI for XYZ, AI for XYZ, and they have
Yeah.
200
Yeah.
employees. So they've been around. They're obviously figure out how to stay alive, which is the rule number one of growing a business to stay in the business.
Yeah.
And now they're completely shifting to AI. And then you have those billion-dollar companies that already, the moment AI or ChatGPT pretty much became accessible for everyone else, even though a lot of people have been using AI for decade or 2 decades even, because it's not a new thing. I think the first implementation of AI were in the 70s or 80s, if
Mm,
before the
mm,
internet, way before the internet. But
yeah.
yet, you see all those major companies, billion-dollar companies, like jumping on AI. And what's really interesting to me as I observe is how do they now stand out amongst their competitors if their AI is not really, and you have to pay thousands of dollars a month for their AI just because
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is part of this billion-dollar company. It's not really different from an AI that is new kids on the block. Maybe it's been developing for the last year or two and does
Yeah.
exactly the same thing and can give it to you at a fraction of that price. So how do they now compete? I think that open up a completely new space, or as far as competition goes in any industry out there, not only tech industry, but again, I see bunch of manufacturers and all traditional, but more traditional businesses and service businesses shifting to AI just to not be left alone, I guess. It's very interesting to
Yeah.
observe
Well,
adaptation of.
maybe AI in name only. I completely agree. I think there's certain areas too, like we talk about this, like people are worried about, like in the accounting teams, back office accounting, and that everyone's always. I shouldn't say always, but for the last couple of years, people are worried about like that job will just go away, and to a degree, maybe in some respects, but not the whole thing, right? And so the real question is like, what happens with like a Salesforce or these CRM things where you have to buy another, $1 million module to plug
That's
in with your
exactly what I had
accounting module
heading right.
and then you have to hire, a team of people to integrate the modules. AI can handle that in a couple of days
Yep.
and it can actually do a better job of it. Right. So that to me is like, what do those guys do? And I don't see a lot of movement on those guys.
And that's precisely what I had in mind, and even the same
Yeah.
company, one of those that
Yeah.
I had in mind. That's exactly what I'm seeing, and again, that's one
Yeah.
thing. Obviously, that they will need a lot more time to actually adapt. And plus, there's
Yeah.
so many stakeholders that have to say yes and evaluate it and say yes and take their time.
Yeah.
Usually, folks that don't really care about speed to market, and then that's definitely going to
Yeah.
change a lot of things. And that leads me to one of my final questions to you today, Michael. Like, you've been in your space for 3 decades, seen a few things, one or two. Where do you see the next decade, or how do you see the next decade shaping with what we discussed so far in your industry?
In short, there's going to have to be a short answer. It's going to have to change. I know that's cop out. There's going to have to be a realization that the cost structure is broken. And I think that's already coming through. So if you look at just orthopedics as a whole or some of these spaces, there's this shift in the treatment paradigm. And I guess you started it off and you sort of maybe let the cat out of the bag or the rabbit out of the hat is you with peptides is that people need to be advocates for themselves and they are more. But the challenge is like we like you've heard of Epic, the software system for electronic medical records, EMR.
Yes.
So that was inside Obamacare. So the PPACA Act had an EMR mandate in it. And so a bunch of these companies like literally were vaulted into, godlike status because they had these electronic medical record systems. And again, this is something that AI agentic could take care of instantly, right? ChatGPT is already instituting it. You can upload your blood work. You can upload your weight, all this stuff, your genetic history, your familial history, and boom, it can start telling you like diagnoses, like you probably should watch out for, XYZ. And not to say that and they do put the caveats because it's not an MD, you can't practice medicine. So the point is, there's still is we still don't have like really good data in medicine, despite what people think. There's really not good level 1 data in certain areas of medicine. And so why is that? Because the system isn't incented to tell you that. So this AI application, what I've noticed, and I guess this is a public forum to say it, there is a massive resistance from providers to actually want to reveal all of that data. And this is the bombshell of the whole thing. How do you know who's a good doctor?
Based on recommendation, referrals. I mean,
That's
referrals in
awesome.
terms of some other
Is that
patients.
how you know someone's a good football player, or do you just watch the game?
You watch the game,
Yeah,
you
and it's an
evaluate it
outcomes
yourself.
base, right? Yep, and you look for the fruits. If the fruits are good, the tree's probably good. So it's this super weirdest thing. So you have to sit there and go through and get referrals from who? Other doctors? Do they have an interest in that equation?
They do, so that would have to be someone in your personal
Yeah.
network, I guess.
Yeah. And so what happens is inside the space, like you'll get calls, anyone that's inside a given discipline, like it's foot and ankle or cardiology or whatever, if they'll ask you, hey, do you know a good doctor for someone in Orlando or someone? And what you'll do is if you're in the space, you'll ask a sales rep. And why
Mm.
will you ask a sales rep? Because they're watching the game.
That's a good point. And that brings me to, or reminds me on something the Ogilvy group was discussing recently on one of their webinars or events, that term content veracity, where it's going to become the main thing to actually stand out with truth, with figuring out what the truth is and where it is. Obviously, having content that shows that veracity in some shape or form so people can
I,
trust you. Because
yeah.
we've seen so many. The first thing when I hear speak with someone nowadays is that I think it's true because I've seen it here and there. I don't think it's AI. Therefore, I'm going to
Yeah.
say it. And
Yeah.
that's becoming the norm. Pretty much quickly became a norm. Not that obviously news outlets were and media were well telling the truth all along for the last years, right? But I think content veracity and veracity in sales and marketing and those companies that actually are building helpful and useful tools for us all, they need to do extra, go that extra mile to figure out a way to make sure that people trust it and believe it, because there's so many con actors and
How do you do
people that
that?
use. How do you do that?
How do you do that?
That's a great question. How do you do that?
How do you do that? Like, is there some omnipotent being? It's weird. Like, remember they had fact checkers and then they
Yeah.
found out that the fact checkers were actually part of the propaganda machine.
Yeah. Now you have the community notes where they're also questionable. It's a good question. How do you do that?
Yeah. Do you go to metadata? It's like, yeah, it's a strange thing. Like what's true. And I think we started the conversation off there as well. It's like, there's your truth, my truth, and the truth. What's true? And it's a strange thing. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. I totally agree. You can always end there. It's like I've noticed there's so much hyperbole and rhetoric in these things. People have done these pump and dumps where they take technology out to marketplace. They know I shouldn't say that. I can't confirm that. It's probably dubious, but there's enough wave behind it, and you get invested, and not only with your time but capital, and you have no choice but to try to exploit it. Right.
Mm.
And it's the right thing to do to pull the plug sometimes. And it's the strange thing. I've seen that happen over and over, especially in devices where it really isn't that great. The patient population's super, maybe for a given population, but super small. But then it ends up getting broad use, overuse causes problems and gets removed. And that is a veracity, that's a veritas issue. What's the truth?
What's the truth? My
What's the
truth.
truth? How do you adjudicate it?
My truth is truer than your truth.
Yeah, I know. It's there, and there's some truth to that.
And on that note, I think we can wrap up today's.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if Matt, that sounds like a huge issue there. It sounds like we could have a huge business opportunity with that.
The truth. That's the truth LLC. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's all right, perfect.
We should trademark
Awesome,
it.
man.
Michael, it was another power hour. Thank you so much for your
Yeah,
time. That's lovely. More Friday afternoon for you, morning for me still,
yeah,
since we're a few hours behind here. I'm looking forward to our next conversation in the near future, and looking forward to seeing some of another more success stories on LinkedIn that you're going to share with us there.
yeah.
And
Awesome.
yeah, thank you so much for your time today.
Perfect. Have a good one, man. Thank you.